Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights. Thanks sponsors, Topps Panini, Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Huggins & Scott Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication. I knew him back in at least the 80s and perhaps the 70s. He's got a great collection, great eye. He asked me about the sequence of how I would do things if I were him. He wanted your first name. I'm honoring that, but there may be some clues. If I heard this, Terry, I would know who you are. But hopefully there aren't that many veterans still out there that can put two and two together. But he has got a great collection and a sharp guy, and I try to be helpful. So here it is, and best to you, Terry.
The 80s when I sold half of it with Robert Edwards Auction. So I had it from about 1880, but people could do that back then. You can't do it now. Whatever gene it is, I can't get rid of it. I keep acquiring stuff and selling it and having fun with it.
You act like that's a problem.
No, except my kids don't want it, and so I'm trying to get rid of it. That's part of why I contacted you.
I've been around a long time too. I've mentioned in my podcast, I'm trying to do 1% a month. So that presumably at the end of 50 months, let's say I should have about half the stuff sold, so that the stuff I still have will be the stuff that I appreciate more, and I'll be better able to find it, Terry.
You know? That's it. That notebooks and all kinds of stuff. It just began to wear me down. I've done now 3 or 4 different auctions because there are different levels of what they'll take in terms of the value of the objects. But the autographs, I don't know if you saw the email I sent earlier.
I did, yeah.
But you can see it's a pretty comprehensive list, and I love this stuff.
There's 2 schools of thought when you're looking to sell stuff or you're trying to reduce the size of your collection when you involve auction houses. One school of thought is you bring them over and you show them everything you got, and you allow them to give you sometimes self-serving advice of how they could do the best for you. But the other school of thought is don't show them anything that you don't want to sell, because whatever you don't want to sell will be what they do want to sell. Whenever I've had auction people over here, I say, here's what I want to sell. There's this electromagnet that's pulling them over to the, yeah, but if we had that, we could really do a good job for you. But still, no cards are going to go in my coffin. But you have the same problem I have. We know the story of each item we have.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the auction houses, some of them are better storytellers than others. Some of them really want to group your items, which conglomerates the story. Hey, here's some autographed 8x10s of some people that maybe you'll like. And you don't always get a very high price there. Somebody will buy it. But the individual pieces need to have the story told.
And that's true. You're right. I tell people about finding my Ty Cobb silk in a book at a bookstore. And I went and bought the book for $1. Somebody put it in there, and you got 1,000 stories. The thing about the autographs is Robert Edwards Auction has done a lot of stuff, but maybe 100 of my autographs would reach their level. And they bought out Huggins & Scott. Yes, and yes. I sold some autographs through Huggins & Scott over the years. And so that's good. But you're right. The tension that people have and that they really don't realize is that auction house wants every item to be worth $500, and they've got a bar, and what they'll do is they'll take my 30, 50 best autographs and they'll do those individually, and then they'll put the rest in a group, and you'll have 10 Hall of Famers that'll go for $100.
In their defense, what they claim is that there's an 80-20 rule, that you're going to get 80% of the value out of your top 20% items, and they're going to push them really hard, and then they're going to group together these other things. So I understand it's a business for them. But the reason I wanted to do this with you, Terry, is you have lots of options right now, including saying, I'm going to put that stuff on eBay. Or if it's cards, I'm going to put it on ComC, or I'm going to take that stuff to a different auction house. And you would think the Robert Edwards of the world and the Heritages are going to say, oh, don't do that. But they actually won't discourage you from doing that. They'll say, if that's what you want to do, but we want the good stuff, and we will promote it, and we'll take good care of it. Ultimately, you get to decide. Do you want to spend a little more time on it and harvest it, or do you want to spend less time?
Something that probably is helpful. I wrote a list of the different people at the different auction houses with whom I sold stuff. So my kids will know that if they're looking at non-sports stuff, contact Tom Boblett. And so I've branched out from Robert Edwards over 20 years.
But what you're doing is, in the untimely event that you don't have a chance to do it, they're not going to be defenseless. But to me, the ideal situation for guys like you and me is to try to transact it while we still can, because we know when we're getting a good deal or not. The first thing you've done is divide your stuff by sport. Looks like it's mostly baseball, but you've got some nice basketball, some nice football, some hockey. The non-sport is probably a completely different auction house, and yet there's some interesting stuff in there too. So I don't like it if they combine the baseball players of a certain vintage that are 8x10s, that are non-Hall of Famers and non-difficult autographs. I get that. But there is no cohesion sometimes with the non-sport, that you've got a Frank Sinatra with a rapper or something. You really need to have an individual thing. When you approached me, one of the things that was interesting, because I'm having this dilemma too. Do you authenticate first or decide where you're going to go first? And I think I lean toward decide where you're going to go with it. If you went to a certain auction house, the auction houses have preferred relationships with certain authenticators. They can get better pricing and better turnaround than you can. As well, the larger auction houses have in-house people that can do a preliminary screen to say, and you probably can do that too, but they can say, here's what we need to send out to authentication so you'll get the best price. And so Jimmy Spence, good friend, Steve Grad, good friend, those guys are great authenticators. But if you did talk to them socially, you might say, here's the kind of stuff I have. Who would you recommend for selling it? And they might say, send it to me, I'll authenticate it. Or if you send it to this person, they'll let me authenticate it and you'll get a good price. So it's a little chicken and egg. The other thing, some of the stuff I've had a long time, I got at different places. So some of it is squeaky clean good. No question, it's completely authentic. And then other stuff, I'm thinking, I don't really remember where I got that. That really needs to be authenticated, because I don't want to stand behind it, because I don't know where it came from. So, but you
do pay for authentication, even if it's not authentic. You have to make some choices.
I got one better than that. I had paid for authentication, even though it's authentic and it's of me. I had to pay to authenticate my own signature. And they've come back and questioned me. What about this one? I said, guys, I submitted it to you. That was me in a hurry. Okay, doesn't match with our exemplars. So they're so conservative sometimes.
I understand that, especially when you get into big names. But I have a long-term relationship, 25 years, with Robert Edward Auctions. The first time I sold at Robert Edwards Auctions, when he sold that Lou Gehrig uniform, the luckiest man in the world. So they give me a good deal in terms of how much they charge me.
Okay, and all that's negotiable, and it's negotiable based on the item, based on the relationship and all that.
Yeah.
But it matters what you're going to net. To me, that puts REA in the lead based on the relationship and the fact that you're going to get good treatment there. But somebody else could sneak up on them if they're a bullseye for exactly what you're trying to sell. For example, if you took your hockey stuff, there may be a Canadian auctioneer that says, hey, we can do best by you with the hockey. So the main thing is looking at the previous catalogs and seeing, is this an auction house that handles stuff like mine? And then you can go from there. But REA handles a lot of stuff, certainly the older stuff, and they're one of the top auction houses. They're your bird in the hand.
It's helpful. I hadn't thought about the different sports in different places.
Yes, absolutely. Because number one, non-sport, and then hockey. I used to bid on the Huggins Scott auctions when it was a conglomerate multi-sport lot, because I knew I'd have very little competition, because nobody wanted it all. I love everything. But basketball should be just basketball. And you got your Pete Maraviches in there. If you let those get pulled out, then that makes the rest of it less desirable, yet it still may be worth it. If an auction house doesn't do non-sport, I don't want to be their guinea pig. I would look at the past catalogs and see they have experience in this and experience in the price range. I have a lot of $50 cards. Those are great cards, but no auction company's going to get excited about those.
Right.
You want 500 and up, and I understand that. But to put 10 $50 cards, that's not the same as a $500 lot.
No.
You'd think it would be, but it will go for a lot less. just because not everyone wants it. I won't say I don't listen to what the auction houses say, but I take more account of what they have done, what their history is, because they all promise and talk a great game, and they're all really good at many things. But you want to be good at the thing you're doing. I don't know if you have older photos. I've got some Type 1 photos. There's a few auction houses that do those really well. But Terry, none of them are going to turn it down. If you say, can you auction this off? Their answer will always be yes. Even if it's lower dollar items, they'll just group them.
Sure.
What I've tried to do, Terry, that you could try to do, I've been unsuccessful of saying, look, if I give you these bigger items, will you treat these smaller items better?
Yep.
Deep down, they look me in the eye and say, we'd be lying if we said we could, because it's against the economics of our business.
I always know there's that tension between giving me the best deal I would want and getting the best deal for them. And they're not the same thing.
Okay, one more thing here. I've experimented in doing my stuff in stages. For example, you talk to REA and say, you know what? I am favorably impressed with your presentation. I've worked with you in the past. Why don't you take the football this year? Show me what you can do. And they'll try to impress you because they're going to want your baseball.
Yeah, that's a good idea. In cards, sometimes I've sent them a few and see how it goes. And then if I like it. But right now, I'm mostly thinking about the photographs and larger items. And this big chunk of autographs, I really haven't touched.
Initially, we're talking about authentication, but how do you feel about sticker authentication versus LOA versus slab?
I don't know what the market would tell me. I'd be happy with just sticker. But what's your sense of the market's reaction to the different ways in which they get authenticated?
Once it's slabbed, you're stuck with that mode of presentation. It's a sticker if it's discreetly placed on the back, and sometimes there's an accompanying letter of authenticity as well. You have more flexibility if it's a discrete sticker. Card, though, it usually is better to have it slabbed. If it's standard size card, or maybe even up to 5x7 or something, you might take that slab. But an 8x10, I don't think you would slab it.
But is your sense that the market, you have a slabbed 8x10 and a sticker 8x10, do they do equally well in the market?
I think less people would want the slabbed.
Okay.
Because it's bulkier and it's for sure authentic, but it doesn't integrate perhaps well with the rest of your collection. You can only display it that way. When I saw your list, 20% of them absolutely need to be authenticated to get your maximum value. But 80% of them could be reviewed by somebody at REA, or sometimes they bring in somebody for a day to just look at all their items and make sure there's nothing terrible in there. They don't spend a lot of time, and he probably knows it's coming from you, so they already have a presumption it's probably mostly good, but they don't want to be embarrassed. And so if they see your Joe DiMaggio's, they're going to absolutely look at those because he's had a secretarial or sister signed kind of things that were seemingly benign. But anyway, they would do that and they would call out something that wasn't good. Then the rest of them, they'd say, we're giving like an auction letter of authenticity on the group. And I've bought autograph sets that later, when I tried to authenticate a few individual cards, they didn't pass, even though the set or the group was generally authenticated.
Yeah.
It just means 95% of them are authentic. Unfortunately, the 5% that weren't authentic, some of them were ones that I really wanted to be authentic. I'm not undefeated, Terry.
I had a 51, 53, and 55 set Bowman's, and they were autographed, and the 57. And I sent the 51 and the 57 to be auctioned off. Robert Edwards auctioned them. About 3 months later, I get a package with about 8 of them back. Unfortunately, Ted Williams is one of them that comes back. So I know how you feel. And they were good about it because I was able to go out and get another card that they could then still sell it as a complete set.
Yeah, that sounds good, except that if you're the recipient, you don't want to pay big bucks for something that's not the real thing. But anyway, my point is, I think authentication is not your first issue. Your first issue is, who do I want to work with for this type of stuff? Price level and this kind of quality, vintage.
Going through an 8x10 envelope last week, I discovered a Clemente, 2 Williams, a Mantle, and Aaron and Banks on a Cub program. So stuff is still hidden down there. I'm sure you find stuff all the time.
I do. I wish I found stuff that nice. I don't, but that's the stuff that really has the value. But as a guy that really has collecting in his blood, you want to see all your items find a nice home.
That's true.
And that means everything, but it may not be all coming from one auction.
The man in the house who